Wonderful. Well, Nishant, we're going to give you a chance to tell your story and to talk more about Terra. Very quickly, everyone, we have Nishant Mani, Chief Business Officer at Terra.do, which is a series of different education programs for educating folks who are motivated to get into climate. He was previously at Fabric Technologies and at Dashlane prior to that, and we're thrilled to have him on State of Talent. With me today is one of our partners, Jack Dunn. I'm Caroline Rubach, Senior Associate at Diversa out of our San Francisco office. And over the last 12 months, I've been really energized getting to work on our climate tech practice. And through that, have gotten to know Nishant pretty well. And so we're really excited to have him on the pod here. We'll jump into it. So Nishant, tell us a little bit more about your journey getting into climate, what motivated you, and what was going through your head when you made that transition, and how you actually went about doing it.
That's great. First of all, thanks for having me, Caroline. Excited to be here. And Jack as well. So my journey moving into climate, there's a bit of a natural, break that people reach in their careers when they have done about 2 decades of working. And it's a combination of, look, I've been doing what I've been doing for a while, looking for a new challenge. And I couldn't walk away from the fact that there were 3 or 4 major problems that felt worth working on. And climate pretty quickly rose to the top of all of those problems because it felt like a force multiplier problem on top of each of them, right? So you take income inequality, you take social inequality, any of these issues, you throw climate change on top of that, it makes all of those other problems way worse. People often ask me, did your feelings change about this problem when you had a kid? In fact, I can't even say that is the case. I have 2 kids.
That's the same for me. That's funny. Yeah.
I couldn't walk away from the fact that we are dealing with an issue over here that has the potential to take large swaths of humanity that actually don't have the resources to fend for themselves the way that I know my kids are going to. And that is making just the basic dignity of living harder for them. And if you kind of move past people to just kind of our environment and the ecosystem in general, I think there's a little bit of, look, we are trashing this place. Let's stop doing that. Let's do better. So I think it was all of that kind of brought me into working in climate. And ever since I decided about 3 or 4 years ago to focus on the problem, it has been a combination of super energizing and a major emotional roller coaster at the same time because of obviously what you see going on in the news and all of the solutions that are sitting and staring in front of us that I've been encountering day after day as I've been living through this space.
Sean,
Interesting.
I feel like you're such a good starting point for these State of Talent, because Terra is a good starting point for somebody wanting to get into climate, right? Tell us a little bit about Terra and what you're doing.
Yeah. So Terra.do is a global platform for skills and careers in the climate economy. And it was started by Anshuman, Kamal, and Mayank, our 3 co-founders, actually built around a point solution for the problems that each of us were facing at the time, which was, people such as us that wanted to make a transition into climate being faced with this pretty uncertain journey of learning, discovery, networking, or even just understanding the entire landscape. Because even as we started peeling a little bit of the onion, we started figuring out, look, this is kind of the entire economy. The climate crisis is not happening because of one thing as much as it is how our economy has built itself over time. We kind of need to almost kind of walk back from it and rebuild in a different way. And we all actually had Kamal Accepted, who is actually a climate scientist and has been for a very long time. The other tech folks in the company have had a several month, year-long journey into understanding what we could do. And we all were staring at the reality that there's actually a much better way to do this. And that led to the creation of our first cohort-based learning program that is kind of like an A to Z on the climate crisis, solutions, and kind of everything surrounding it, such as policy, technology, climate justice issues, etc. And that program was the seed that led to a lot of things built on top of it, and is still really kind of the center and the heart of the company. But it has since then evolved into a broad platform where people can come in, find community, learn about career opportunities, meet with employers, while also obviously learning about the whole ecosystem through our flagship program, as well as several other programs that we offer. And we are slowly actually starting to extend into the world of enterprises, where the challenge that they have is making reality the declarations that they've made on net zero goals or sustainability goals or what have you, which again is kind of almost an unraveling of how they do business today. So there's lots of opportunity for us to help them make that transition. So that's a little bit of kind of where we will be going and are going as we speak. But yeah, that's the company in a nutshell. And actually my role over there, I'm the Chief Business Officer, which really means kind of anything focused on revenue growth and building a healthy business out of the company.
And Nishant, something that I know we've been talking about offline on this is, we have this common conversation with our team at Diversa of, hey, I'm speaking to this executive and they gave me a call and said, hey, I only want to get into climate for my next role and to contribute my talent towards the climate crisis. And so what advice do you have for executives specifically who are looking to make the move into climate?
First of all, I'm super happy to hear that that's happening. We need more and more of these folks joining the solution space. Advice to folks in that situation, there's a few things. Look, it's a growing space, and what is happening today is going to be very, very different than what's happening tomorrow, because the rate of change is actually pretty astounding in the space. Folks have probably encountered that a lot of the opportunity that they're seeing tends to be in earlier stage companies that are maybe slightly earlier on the R&D cycle, but even that is changing rapidly. I personally know of several companies, for example, that have moved from, I have this technology that I know works, I have working prototypes, and it's going to take me another 3 years for this to get to a level of scale where I have the unit economics to go scale this thing, to the IRA passed, and that happened for me now because of these credits that I started getting for what I'm doing. And they've accelerated their go-to-market plans by 3 years. So again, it's changing super rapidly. And the second piece of advice that I would give is to recognize that you may have heard this, but there really is a place for almost every person in this ecosystem, because at the end of the day, you can't walk away from the fact that every climate tech business is a business. It requires people in absolutely every function for that business to grow. And as the industry starts maturing, more and more of these folks that are not in the absolute core of, let's say, engineering or R&D are required disciplines. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it is a roller coaster of a marathon at that. So bringing trusted friends with you on the journey really helps. But there is very much work to do for everyone.
Are there particular technologies or parts of the sector, Nishant, that maybe when you have that conversation with someone who's saying, when I think about the climate crisis, it's just existential dread for me, right? And I don't know where to start. And I don't think that's super uncommon. But, for me, and I certainly have not been getting deep in this world for as long as you have, but over the last kind of 12 to 18, 24 months, my experience getting in the weeds with quite a few companies has actually been one of sort of optimism, right? Seeing how many smart people are working on the problem, seeing all of the different angles that people are conceiving and executing against to help tackle the climate crisis. Are there particular technologies or particular models that you think of, having gone through that? Oh, that's actually accelerating faster than we would have expected. I thought that was a decade time horizon, and here we are 3 years later with a lot of progress. I'm just curious, really, kind of what trends you watch most closely from that standpoint.
It's a great question. It's actually one of my favorite questions, because the answer to this question is, oh my God, it is everywhere. So there's a few things. One is, the major industries that come to mind when you think about major climate solutions: energy, transportation, the built environment, heavy industry, food and agriculture. That probably covers most of it. They cover, like, let's say 80 to 90% of the solution space right now. And there's a massive one, by the way, around adaptation, that business models are a little harder. They tend to be kind of focused on by the philanthropic world. And there's this kind of vanguard of carbon capture that is very much an R&D stage. Even business models are unclear. These sectors that I talk about they make up a massive portion of the world's GDP. What is amazing to me about these sectors is that in literally all of them, there are technologies that are well past the point of R&D. They are very much not just in deployment, but in rapid deployment and scaling stage. Probably the most obvious ones are in renewables. But if you look in the world of, and obviously also in electric vehicles, like, these are getting a lot of play right now. But the entire world of how renewables and electric vehicles and batteries related to them feed back into the grid, and storage becomes a thing, because that's a huge part of what makes this whole work. And on the food side, massive innovations on food wastage, on perishability, obviously plant-based food, which has already had a pretty big upswing. I mean, again, I can kind of start going through this, right? Every sector you can think of in this list has huge technologies that are at scale. And what makes me the most excited about this space is the deployment problem. It is actually not even the R&D problem as much as the deployment problem. And where I see, I guess, the most traction is in where there's this intersection between lots of deployment capability and just the right amount of push from a policy perspective, which, again, we just passed a crazy bill that is still barely making its way towards the market. The companies examples that I told you about that kind of accelerated their plans by 3 years, they are in fact on the vanguard. Most of the IRA is still making its way through the sausage factory that our federal state system is in, or federalist structure is in the US. And it's going to take a little more time for the full might of the IRA to really kind of show itself in the marketplace. But anything that falls anywhere in that intersection is poised for tons of growth. And you can already see that in the marketplace.
Yeah. And, I think there's this narrative right now, especially in terms of venture capital, or maybe just capital in general, that climate focused companies or climate adjacent companies have been somewhat insulated from the broader tech correction. I think folks who are deep in the space sort of tend to speak about that like that's incidental and also inevitable, right? I mean, I think the sort of framing that John Doerr uses, right, of this is a bigger opportunity than the internet, is a common refrain that we hear from founders and investors in the space. But how do you think about that? And maybe connecting back to your theme that it's very difficult to talk about climate tech as a sector and almost silly sometimes, right? But I'd love any thoughts you have on sort of that investing landscape and how it's performing in the broader market right now.
Yeah. Look, the insulation is definitely there because, again, you have one layer of the insulation, which is the policy blanket. You have another layer of the insulation, which is the opportunity blanket, right? It's opened up. People now see that we can't walk away from the problem. Policy is working on the problem. Companies have pledged to work on the problem because they see the writing on the wall. And once all of that happens, the opportunity is huge. And there's some aspect of the timing feels right, partially because of some of the stuff and partially because there has been a lot of technology that has been baking and growing over the past decade or so. All that said, I cannot also shy away from the fact that the kind of broader, let's be more prudent about how we invest and how we run businesses hasn't made its way into the climate space as well, right? Like everyone.
Yeah.
Or, yes, I see this, but what is the revenue model? What are the unit economics? And there is more asking for that now compared to before, at least when it comes to how you peg your valuations for your startup and stuff like that, because the investors talk to each other as well. So I don't think you can walk away from that fact, but the combination of plenty of dry powder, lots and lots of activity still in the marketplace, and lots of opportunity ahead. This is kind of what I'm seeing in this space.
And Nishant, pivoting back to our talent focus here, as someone who's taking the Terra course and finds it incredibly rewarding and, partly just like an overload of all this information, but so interesting. Can you give some quick insight on the actual course offering for folks who might be interested in advancing their own climate journey and their transition into it?
First of all, I'm super happy to be speaking to someone that's in the program. I love it when I meet our fellows and alumni. And I would actually love for you to add to what I'm saying because you're going through it as you speak. But really the program is designed for folks that want to be able to walk away with a much clearer picture of how they fit into the overall equation of solving this problem, given who they are, given their own personal constraints. We all have constraints of our own. But by kind of doing so by arming them with an understanding top to bottom of, as I said, the science that has led to, or a scientific understanding of kind of what has led to the crisis. What are our best known solutions out in the marketplace right now? And this host of stuff surrounding it, such as how does policy play in? How does basic economic theory play in some cases? How does it differ across countries and geographies and social groups? Because this is kind of one of the most insidious things about this problem is that my climate crisis is different than your climate crisis if you're sitting in the opposite side of the world. And not paying attention to that fact is actually almost designed to make sure you're not going to solve the problem because people have to get together to work on it. The climate justice issues, et cetera, right? So we firmly believe that for people to be, for them to actually be able to be effective in solving the problem, they really need to understand the breadth of the problem and look at it from these different angles. And we kind of compress it all into 12 weeks. We say between 80 to 100 hours of your time during those 12 weeks. So it's pretty intensive. It requires you to jump in pretty deep. And I've said this a couple of times, but it is an emotional roller coaster, even the course. because we go through, oh my God, everything is broken. Wow, there's a lot of option to, the skies are red today while I'm doing this course. Like, what is going on? So like, you just have all this stuff going on. People are kind of discovering how they view the problem with people in the program who actually come from crazy diverse backgrounds. That was actually one of the things that was probably the most surprising of things that we discovered when we started this program. We expected classic early adopters to show up, but it turns out that we had, farmers and creative writers, and of course, engineers in Silicon Valley, and kind of everybody sitting together in the same room, virtual room, and sharing perspectives on the problem. Again, not just from the US, but from, I think at this point, I've lost track. And I've got to imagine it's over 50 countries at this point, over the length of our existence. Again, these perspectives make such a huge difference. So that's a little bit more about it. But if you have anything to add, I'm happy to hear it.
Thanks for sharing more on that. That's really interesting. And I think one of my biggest takeaways just this far, I think I'm into week 4 or 5 of my cohort, is the community aspect. Because a lot of times when I'm speaking with executives about, okay, you want to get into the climate space, how are you going to go about doing that? What are resources we can share in helping that transition and building out this network? One of the big problems is the networking and the community mind share. Particularly with peers, but just in general, because I think there is an increasing growing awareness around climate and folks wanting to contribute their talents towards that. But in terms of knowing where to start, to your point, and then also having trusted folks to bring along in the journey, that's been a really big value out of the course also, just that community building and mind share.
I didn't plant this. You said this yourself.
I did.
we say this out loud, but you don't see it until you feel it in some extent. That really is so it's so intangible. But once you're starting to go through it, you realize, hey, this is actually super valuable, because so much of this is managing kind of who I am as a person and how I'm seeing this thing, and reflecting that from people around you that are going through the journey with you is such a huge part.
Nishant, how do you, I feel like one conversation that we have with the executive community a lot is people have a very difficult time taking off the lenses of, if I'm going to something mission driven, I am sacrificing on my economic opportunity and my career progression. And, our feeling has been that has really shifted over the last few years in climate. But to your point before, there's still a earlier stage component to a lot of what we're doing. So if you're running a $500 million P&L right now, there's only a handful of climate companies where you could expect to go and be operating at the same scale that you are. So there is a stage adaptation component if you want to deploy your skills in climate. I'm sure you have a lot of those conversations. Are there any points you would make to folks that are kind of wrestling with that in terms of how to think about that career and economic opportunity over the next couple decades?
Yeah. What you're saying is very true. It's a problem that's there in front of us, is that if you are coming from larger scale or enterprise scale problems, the companies that are solving problems at that scale are just starting to come about as we speak.
Yeah.
It's not that I can count them on 2 hands, but we are probably not talking about in the thousands. But it is growing again, literally month over month. We're talking about several new companies starting to hit that stage. The places, some of this is looking in places that might be slightly unlikely for the classic kind of startup mindset person. There are, because this problem is so systemically linked to some of our largest industries, most major companies in these sectors are starting to make big moves. So, very obvious example is GM and their big announcement towards moving to all electric by 2035. I, in fact, listened to an interview with Mary Barra on NPR where she was talking about the progress that she was making, and she was getting grilled by NPR. But really, how are you guys going to do this? The numbers you're talking about don't hold a candle to who you are as a company. Yeah. So if you think about that growth opportunity inside a company like GM, there is actually an incredible amount of value that folks that know how to play at enterprise level, but based on improved organizations. So that's kind of one of the possible ways to solve this problem. But when you work from the first principles and look at here's the change that needs to happen, the timeline is not that far. We are talking a couple of decades at most by which we need to make this kind of movement. And again, large companies have now started waking up to the fact that that is the timeline for them as well. The opportunity is there. There is a question of working your way into opportunities that may look different than what you've dealt with in the past. And the networking that comes with that and the adaptation that comes with that, whether it's going towards startups or going towards these enterprises that are making shifts or what have you. So it is not as simple as, look, I was the former CFO at Dropbox and I want to go do a gig in a climate tech company. What's the laundry list of like the next 10 companies I should look at? There was let's not. I think it's a little more complex than that. And working through that is just part of the journey of where we are.
Yeah, and I think that the I guess sort of Silicon Valley macro versus Silicon Valley geographically, the sort of startup ecosystem is generally well equipped to have that conversation about stage, making a bet on a category that you're passionate about, right? But I think for some people, the fact that you can do so much good and have so much impact sort of puts these blinders on where it's like, okay, I must be thinking about a constrained opportunity. That's very insightful. Thank you.
Nishant, I would love to just hear from you on how transitioning into climate has shifted your view of your career, going off of what we just talked about, and your worldview overall.
Great questions. For my career, maybe the best way to say it is it feels to some extent like I have dedicated myself to a problem that is so much bigger than something I can ever wrap my head around that I am guaranteed to be a lifelong student, which kind of solves a large portion of my own career aspirations, right? Like I wake up every morning wanting to learn. It's kind of been who I've been as a person. And so it's kind of squared that problem. That's never going to be an issue. And the same thing has also maybe reset a little bit of my own goal framing to where the problem feels less around am I progressing in my career and more around is something happening to this point. And if I can wake up every day and be able to tell myself that the work that I'm doing is actually having a direct consequence or impact. A little aside, by the way, on this. I think several people may have gone through this, but when I first decided to move to climate, I had this kind of framework in my head of like, I want to maximize the amount of carbon reduced per minute that I spend working. And I've so walked away from it. This problem is so much more complex than that. It is so much more about the interaction between between climate, between the environment and people and other living beings, and even just our general ecosystem. Um, and so having a positive impact on the crisis is so much more than just carbon reduction. But, if I can wake up every morning knowing that I'm having direct, substantial impact on this crisis, and I still have a long road to go, and I'm learning, I'm done. I can keep doing this for a very long time. So it's kind of changed a little bit of what goal am I trying to accomplish. And it kind of frames towards the problem rather than towards my own accomplishments, which has honestly been fantastic.
Yeah, really
and
interesting.
I guess towards my worldview, it's probably something similar, which is, look, let's just do good things. Let's all try and do better every day. That's that's the best way that I guess I can articulate.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, this has been a very insightful and inspiring conversation, and I'm really grateful that you joined us late evening your time, early morning ours. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to just continuing all on this climate journey together, and thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And, to folks that are watching this, there's so much to do. And there is so much you can gain personally out of jumping into the fray and rolling up your sleeves and doing good work over here. So feel free to reach out if I can ever help, and come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks.
Great to see you guys. Bye.